everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, staff writer, Giacomo Tonini. Giacomo, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Jeffrey Epstein is once again dominating the headlines. His relationship with President Trump is now under renewed scrutiny, and the DOJ has been criticized over a memo they released in early July saying that there was no client list regarding the case and that no documents regarding the case are going to be released. And as we remember, back in 2019, before Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his jail cell, he was charged with sex trafficking minors. And many of these alleged crimes took place in his properties all around the globe. And you've done a lot of reporting on these properties. So to start off the conversation, how much was Epstein worth and how much of his fortune was tied up in his real estate properties?
So we know from a report that his estate put out after he died in 2019 that after his death, he was worth around $578 million. And of that, based on the valuations that the executors of the estate put together at the time, the real estate was around 117 million of that number.
And so where were these homes located? Because you're reporting he had everything from Paris to properties in New York, everywhere in between, in the Caribbean. So where were they located and how did he come into possession of them? Was it through business partnerships? Was he buying them himself? What did that look like?
Right. So I guess we can go through them sort of one by one. One of the most sort of prominent ones was a 7-story townhouse on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. Then he also had the two islands that are well known as well, Great St. James and Little St. James Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where he flew to frequently, as we know from the cases that were made against him. Then there was also a 10,000-acre ranch in New Mexico, near Santa Fe. And then he also had an apartment in central Paris, just near the Arc de Triomphe. That was around more than 7,000 square feet. And then he also had a house in Palm Beach, in Florida. So in terms of how he, came into possession of these, most of them he purchased over the years, between the 90s and the, 2000s, early 2010s. I think the last purchase was the second island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And one property, though, the one in New York, he didn't actually purchase. What happened was Les Wexner, who was one of Epstein's most prominent clients, had purchased it in the 1990s. We sort of know from reporting that Epstein used the home for many years, but it wasn't until 2011 that the house was actually formally transferred to him, to a company that he owned from Wexner. There's no actual recorded price in the deeds. Other reporting has stated that he paid $20 million for it, but sort of on paper it was transferred to him. So that's sort of how he came into possession of all these various homes.
Something that we know based on years of reporting surrounding Jeffrey Epstein is that he was connected to the world's most powerful and the wealthiest. And someone you mentioned is billionaire Les Wexner. And he was connected to several of Epstein's properties, particularly the Manhattan Mansion, according to your reporting. So talk to us a little bit about that longstanding business relationship and what that and the property transfers really suggest about the level of scrutiny Epstein operated under.
So what we know about their relationship is that I believe that they first met in the late 80s and, for at least more than a decade, Wexner was one of Epstein's most prominent clients. We don't know in total how much Epstein received from that business relationship. Wexner has said that he cut ties with Epstein in 2007, so a year before Epstein was convicted in Florida. In terms of the connections of the properties, I mentioned the one in Manhattan. Epstein also for a time owned 2 properties in New Albany, Ohio, which is where Wexner still lives and where he's sort of, been really involved in developing and expanding that town and the developments there. In terms of sort of other clients, the only other sort of well-known client that we know for sure is Leon Black, who was the, former CEO of private equity giant Apollo. And we know from a report that Apollo put out that at least until 2012 to 2017, I think was the time frame, Black was one of Epstein's clients. This is all just to say that, even after that conviction in 2008, it's clear that Epstein still did have clients. His account at JP Morgan wasn't closed until 2013, for example, from court records. So obviously this is a question that so many people have, right? How was he able to maintain certain relationships after? We don't know the extent of them, but we do know that, even after that conviction, he was still able to make money and have clients. And obviously we know, considering he was worth almost 580 million when he died, that he was still able to generate income from these relationships.
And I think really some of the most haunting aspects of your reporting is that in all of the properties in this real estate portfolio, so many of these alleged crimes happened there, and there are dozens and dozens of victims. So when these properties were sold off, did those funds impact the victims at all? What did that really look like?
So it's difficult to sort of really break it down completely, based on sort of the statements that the estate's lawyers have made, that the Victims Compensation Fund has made. We know in total the home sold for about 160 million. There's one, the ranch in Santa Fe. We don't know the exact sale price, but call it 160 million that all of them sold for since his death. It seems that about 50 million of that stayed with the estate, partly to pay other creditors or to pay sort of administrative fees. Of that other 110, we know 30 million, which is half of the sale price of the islands, went to the U.S. Virgin Islands government. That was part of the settlement that the estate did with the government there, and that 30 million went to a trust that was set up to provide support and services for victims of sexual abuse in the islands. And sort of the remainder of that, so 50, 80, so around 80 million, we believe did go to the Victims Compensation Fund. We know that since his death, that the estate has paid out more than $160 million to victims. They also, repaid a $30 million loan. But, the estate still has significant assets to this day. And, we don't know how much more will be paid to victims. But if you're looking at sort of the sale of the properties, we know that, if you're including the trust and the compensation fund, more than half of it has gone to victims in some way or form.
And the Jeffrey Epstein story is really, it's an international story. So many people know it, and so many people are just disgusted by these heinous alleged crimes. And so many of them, as you and I have been saying, happened inside of his properties, at his properties. I mean, even one of the islands in the Caribbean is known as Pedophile Island. So I'm imagining that the executors of his estate had a tough time selling these. What did that really look like? What were some of those challenges?
I mean, the clearest one is that they had to sort of lower their asking prices on, I think, nearly all of these properties. On the islands, for example, they were first asking for 125 million for both islands combined. They ended up selling for 60 million, to a private equity billionaire who's, since said he's going to develop a luxury resort there. And even on the other homes, we know for example, the Palm Beach house sold for 4 million less than what they asked for. The home in New York, they were asking 88 million. They sold it for 51 million. The apartment in Paris and the ranch in New Mexico also sold for less than what they initially asked for. Or at least in the New Mexico ranch, they lowered the asking price. We don't know the total sale price. But, clearly that association had an impact on, if these were just properties you were selling and they weren't, previously owned by Epstein and, like you were
associated
saying,
with these crimes.
Yes, and the site of these alleged crimes, then maybe they could have gotten more for them. And if we're looking at sort of the impact, at least one case in Palm Beach, the developer who purchased the home, tore it down, raised it, and even changed the address so that they could remove any sort of physical association with Epstein and what happened there.
And even at the time of his death, as you said earlier in this conversation, Epstein was an ultra wealthy man. His executors valued his estate to be worth $578 million. I mean, that's just a huge number. As we sit here now in 2025, what is that estate worth and where is that money going?
Right. So the latest report we have is from the end of March. And at that point, the estate held $131 million. It had been whittled down quite a lot, but then last fall, the estate got I believe, $112 million tax refund from the IRS. And if we're looking at sort of what still is there now, it's not as detailed as that first report from after he died. But we know, for example, that the estate has about $49 million in cash. 4,000 in jewelry and watches, about 3 million in loans receivable, and then the last bucket, which is the largest one, is $79 million in just as entities. So we know all the real estate has been sold off, right? All the homes have been sold. That, entities could be sort of anything. We know when he died, he had quite a lot of money in cash, obviously, which we do know. But the other stuff he had was outside the homes was private equity and hedge fund investments, fixed income investments, equity stocks. So that remaining 79 million in these other entities could be any of those other investments they still have. It could be other investments the estate has made since then that we don't know about. When he died, he also had a line item in the estate for aviation assets, so planes. There's also boats in that item. So we're not quite sure sort of what's in there. It's not been made public, but clearly also thanks to that tax refund, it's still a sizable sum that's still in that estate.
Yeah, still millions upon millions in that estate. What's happening to that money? Where does it go?
So again, the quarterly reports that they file aren't super detailed, but they do say, for example, when money has been paid out for, if it's like property payments, right, when they sold homes, or payouts to, victims' compensation funds, or sort of other, ins and outs. He repaid a $30 million loan a while back. So we really don't know exactly, but, we get the snippet, every quarter on what's going on there. Presumably there could be other, lawsuits filed for compensation. There's been various settlements over the years. So we just don't know sort of the full details of that.
Giacomo, I always appreciate your reporting and I appreciate these conversations. Thanks so much for coming on in.
Thanks for having me.